This is For the Love of Learning, Voices of the Alternative Education Movement. Be inspired by the voices of visionaries, changemakers, and ordinary, extraordinary people who do what they do all for the love of learning.
This is For the Love of Learning, Voices of the Alternative Education Movement. I'm Lainey Liberty, and this is episode number 8. The theme of tonight's episode is unschooling. Unschooling is a term that the late John Holt coined in the late 70s to describe learning that is based on the child's interests and needs. Unschooling does not begin with the parent's notion of what is important to learn. Rather, it begins with the child's natural curiosity and expands from there. Each of tonight's panelists, including myself, are parents of unschoolers and share how they support their children's journey into learning. Additionally, each of the panelists share from their own form of advocacy as a way to educate and support others. I'm going to give a brief introduction to each of our panelists, then we'll start the conversation. Although these introductions are brief, we have more information about each of our panelists on the show notes page located at consciousconsumernetwork.tv, and look for the show notes page for episode number 8. There you will find more extensive information about their backgrounds and links to each of their projects, books, and websites. So let's jump right in. First, let's meet Scott Noel. Scott is a parenting coach and the author of The Daily Groove, How to Enjoy Parenting Unconditionally. He helps leading-edge parents empower their children and themselves with an approach he calls PATH parenting. PATH stands for partnership, authenticity, trust, and heart. Welcome, Scott. I can't wait to hear more about this.
Thanks, Lainey. It's a pleasure to be here.
Next, let's meet Teresa Graham-Brett. Teresa has a passion for creating social change by combining her work in social justice, education with parenting. She founded Parenting for Social Change and authored a book with the same title. She works with other parents to do inner work as the foundation for outer action that ultimately liberates individuals, groups, and communities. Welcome to the show, Teresa. So happy you're here with us tonight.
Thank you, Lainey. I'm excited to be here.
And finally, let's meet Jeremy Stewart. Jeremy is the director of Class Dismissed, a compelling documentary that explores the real-world journey into homeschooling. When the film hit theaters last year, it screened to sold-out audiences across the U.S. Jeremy and his wife and 10-year-old unschooled daughter live in California, where I'm from, and enjoy their unschooling life. Welcome, Jeremy.
Thank you very much. I'm really happy to be here.
Let's start off with you first. Can you share a little bit about what led you and your family down the unschooling path?
Sure, yeah. So interestingly enough, I didn't know anything at all about homeschooling or unschooling particularly when our daughter was born. And my wife gave me a book by John Holt and said, here, you might want to read this. So, I read it, and a lot of it made instant sense to me. And then when our daughter was about 2, we went to the HSC conference in California, which is the big California homeschool conference. And we went to just kind of fact gather, to sort of see what all this was about. And I still knew nothing about any of this. And I have to say that within minutes of arriving at the hotel, I was confronted with this girl who was about 6 years old, who was staying in the room next door to us. And we were unpacking, and we had our little badges on that said newbie, first timer, like deer in the headlights. And this 6-year-old girl comes right up to me, looks me right in the eye, and says, oh, are you new to the conference? Well, welcome. I've been coming every year for 6 years. If you need anything, let me know. I can show you around. And if you like any music, I play the fiddle, and I'm staying next door, and you can come by and have a concert if you like. And I was completely blown away. I had never been spoken to by any child of any age so directly and with such confidence. And I just was speechless. So the rest of the weekend was kind of like that. I was so blown away by the kids and young adults and teens that I met at the end of the conference, I said to my wife, Kim, well, if these kids are the result of unschooling, then, sign me up because there was something different. It was very palpable. So we just sort of decided that's what we were going to do. And it wasn't like we just suddenly said, okay, now we're going to start unschooling. We just sort of kept doing what we had already been doing, which is living our lives together and enjoying our time together and, learning and living together in the world. And that's kind of how we began. And then, of course, I started doing all of this research and looking into, well, what's out there for information. And then, of course, I decided to make a film.
Well, we're glad you did. We're so glad. We're actually going to show a clip from that film, the trailer, at the end of the first hour. And we're going to talk about the film quite in detail. And actually, let's jump over to Scott, because Scott, you're in the film, Class Dismissed. And I know that you two have known each other for how much time?
We met in 2011, around the time when he interviewed me. And I guess you might have been reading some of my writing before that.
Yes, I knew who you were and had read some of your things, and you were on my hit list of people to get in the film.
Hit list? Oh, no.
It was dangerous. It was in the middle of winter. It's a sunny day, so you can't tell on the film. You'll see a little clip. I'm in the trailer, but it was actually like about 0 degrees that day, and I got hypothermia at some point in the interview. We had to stop, but no, I'm exaggerating. Anyway, it was a great opportunity to meet what's your name? Jeremy.
Well, but before we get into the actual film, because I mean, it's part of the ways that each person on this panel is supporting, really this message of unschooling and learning naturally. I want to hear from each of the panelists first. Scott, why don't you share with us what led you down the path to unschooling, and how did you find your way to this place?
I was actually on the path before I knew I was on it, and it probably started about the time that I was 19. I dropped out of college, and I had a kind of a crappy experience going. I thought college was going to be this expansive thing, and they were just sort of telling me how I had to learn, and I really wanted to design my own education, and so I finally decided I wasn't there for the right reasons, so I left. And I remember that day I left, I said, you know what? I know how to learn, and I'm resourceful. I know where the library is. I know how to ask questions, and I didn't have the word unschooling, to assign to that sort of that attitude. But essentially, that's what it was. I said I'm an unschooler, and I did actually everything I wanted to learn after that. I learned through. I did sometimes take college classes, but I also went to the library. I interviewed experts in various fields that I was interested in, and very unconventional education. But that's how unschooling started for me as a person. So it wasn't very difficult when I became a parent to make that. To make that shift into doing it with my kids. And like a lot of people, Jeremy, I don't know about Teresa, but I also was influenced by John Holt. My wife and I read his book, How Children Fail, and that really moved us to see how school didn't really educate us in a truly nurturing way. And so we decided to forge our own path, and quickly lined up with a lot of other people who had chosen the unschooling path. It just made perfect sense.
Did you have to convince your wife that this was going to be a good path to take, or was she initially on board?
It was easy, actually. It's kind of funny because I had been really successful in school. I was just good at taking tests. I always got A's. She had not been. She had struggled with school. She's more of a right brain person, not as analytical. And so she just didn't do so well in the left brain schooling methods, and so had a very negative experience. But it was a negative experience for me too, because I was successful in school, which meant that all the other kids hated me because I moved them, I made them look worse. And in this whole competitive paradigm, it doesn't allow for everyone to win. It's a win-lose kind of paradigm. So she lost in that game. I quote won the game, but it was really a loss because nobody liked me. So we both said, yeah, school sucks. Let's try a different path.
Awesome. I've never told this story, but I kind of, you just said that you won, your wife lost. Well, I played the game. I played the system. I was blessed with a very great short-term memory. It was a photogenic memory. I could look at something and take a photo of it in my mind and read it. I could recall it and read it. So I didn't have to learn anything. So I played the system. I could take a test and pass the test at 100% correct answers because I could see what I've just studied 10, 15 minutes before. And so I played it. Did I learn anything? No. But, my lesson was I learned how to play the system. Anyway, thank you for sharing your story. Let's jump on over to Teresa. I would love to hear what led you and your family down the path of unschooling.
Well, it was actually the oldest child in my life, Martel, who was really clear that what we were doing was not working. And so, I had read about homeschooling and unschooling. I was cursed with way too much time in school by choice, I thought, but maybe not by choice. There was a lot of pressure to do that. And when we decided we were going to have a child, I did a lot of research and reading, read about unschooling. My partner, Rob, really did not fit well in school. And he also did later go to college and found his passion. And of course, then once he found his passion, he just blossomed. And so we were very open to the idea that we would do something different depending on the needs. But Rob actually was much more open than I was. And it wasn't until the relationship between Martel and I began to really deteriorate because of the ways in which I controlled and dominated him, all quite lovingly, I thought, that, and his rebellion really pushed me to do some deep examination of my own, biases and beliefs about my role as a parent. And that began the process of moving toward unschooling. Yeah.
How old was your son when you came to this decision?
He was 5. Yeah, he was 5.
Now, I know a little bit about your background, and as I said in the introduction, you have a background in social justice, and you bring that into the whole parenting sphere. Can you talk a little bit about how social justice relates to parenting, and then bring that back around to your choice to unschool?
Mm-hmm. I did, when working in universities, that was my career before leaving and moving on to doing parenting for social change and focusing on that work. But I did a lot of social justice education with students, undergraduate students and graduate students in universities. And it was really about helping people to understand the underlying dynamics within our systems and institutions that are based in power and control and domination. And we discuss it a lot around social identities. And so I did just years and years of work with students. And then my sort of aha was I didn't really see the connection at that point. We talked about ageism. But didn't really see the connection between how it is adults treat children and disregard children and really, in many ways, dehumanize children as as really the foundation of how injustice perpetuates itself in our culture. So as I began to question the ways in which I used tools of domination and oppression in my own relationship with Martel, then I began to really write and explore this idea between how it is we treat children, which seems obvious at a very surface level. Like I could get that at a surface level, but it wasn't until I began to do my own unlearning process and really internalizing the ways in which I could understand how I just by default, from the ways in which I learned as a child, use control and power over those who were younger than me. And so unschooling for me, really, when I started writing about it, even though we were unschoolers, I didn't frame it in that way, because for me, it really is about undoing social structures and systems in our culture that lead us to disempower young people and children, which then allows them to continue that system and perpetuate that system as they become adults. So that's really what I began to understand about my own socialization and my own internalization of those processes, and then having to unlearn that in order to create a more equitable relationship that really honored the young people that are in my life.
Wow, I'm really, really glad that you shared that. We don't look at parenting oftentimes as part of the social, what am I trying to say? Something that's outside social justice. It's not part of that system. That's an internal system that we don't look at from the outside. And so somehow we don't think that all of those rules apply to how we treat our children. Of course, I'm here. I have to guide my child and discipline my child, and all of these other ideas that we're given and that we somehow believe is the truth, and we don't question. At what point did you start questioning? And actually, I want to take this to the panel. At what point did you start questioning that what we were taught about education was not working? At what point did you start to question everything that you knew, may not be what we thought it was? Do you want to take that, Jeremy? You're muted.
Yeah, there we go. I have to remember to do that. Sure, yeah. Well, it's interesting because for me, when I was a kid in school in England, I went through a traditional public school education, and like Scott, I was a good student through middle school. Got good grades, was very interested in what I was doing, and sort of played the game a little bit, but I seemed to be pretty good at it. And then I got to high school, and everything changed. And in high school, I suddenly realized that the school had absolutely no respect for my opinions whatsoever. And I remember very distinctly having a career counseling meeting, like 15 years old, and where I had to tell them what I wanted to be when I grew up, which, first of all, I thought was a ridiculous question. I'm 15. What do I really know about the world at this point? Not a lot. I've been in an institution my whole life, right? So I thought the question was stupid. And then at the time, I was very interested in music, and I was drumming, and I wanted to be a professional drummer. In fact, I wanted to be a rock star. So my question, my answer to their question, what do you want to be when you grow up, was, I want to be a rock star. And the guy looked at me like, well, you can't be a rock star. That's not a job. And I said, well, it is. There's plenty of people that are rock stars, and I'm going to be one. And so, of course, the conversation went downhill pretty rapidly. And then I was confronted with a series of choices in this meeting about what I was going to study for the remaining high school years. And I said, well, I'm really interested in art, like fine art, painting. So I'd like to do that. And they said, well, you can't do that because you're already doing music, and music is an art. So you can only do one or the other. And I said, well, then it's music, because I want to be a rock star. And then they said, well, you have to pick a language. I said, well, I'm not really interested in languages right now. Well, you have to pick something, French or German or Latin. So it felt like it was one decision after another, with one door after another being slammed in my face. So my response to high school was to just rebel completely. I realized interests were they had no interest in what I cared about. And they were forcing me into these funnels that I didn't really belong or want to go. I kind of knew what I wanted to do. It was pretty clear to me at that point. So I just rebelled. And the rest of my high school was just me doing everything I could possibly do to get out of doing all the things they told me I was supposed to do so I could spend more time on my music. And much to my parents' chagrin, when it came to examination time, I just filled out bubble sheets without even reading the questions. I mean, I literally just went in and said, I'm just going to put A, B, C, D. I'm done. That's it. I'm done. If you're not going to pay any attention to me, then I'm not going to pay any attention to this system. And so I basically flunked high school in a big way. I left the minute I could get out of the door. My father was absolutely furious. And 2 months later, I got a job as a professional musician and traveled around the world for 3.5 years making a living as a musician. So, and so it's interesting, this whole idea of respect and, respecting our kids' choices and things. I came very face to face with that, I guess, at that time in my life. And as Scott said earlier, one of the things the word unschooling, I didn't know about that till a lot later on when we had our daughter and everything, and I got involved in this whole thing. But if I look at my own life, then really and truly, I'm an unschooler. As a filmmaker, I'm entirely self-taught. I never went to film school. What was the point of that? It seemed to me like, well, look, I became a musician because I wanted to be a musician. So I'm going to become a filmmaker because I want to become a filmmaker. And I'm going to do everything I can possibly do to make that happen. And pretty much everything I've done in my life since leaving school has been self-directed and self-driven because I wanted to do it. And I wasn't going to have anyone else tell me, no, you can't do that because you're already doing this, and so on and so on. So I guess that was my sort of personal face-to-face experience with that sense of, as Teresa was saying, not being respected as a young person and having my voice heard, And it's interesting as a parent now, because I think one of the things that I struggle with in my own parenting with my daughter, who's now 10, is, she's been given huge amounts of freedom that I never had. And, we love that. But when she comes back sometimes and throws it back in my face, that little voice of my father pops up. Well, you can't do that, And I realized how conditioned I was by my upbringing, by the way I was raised, by my schooling. And it's so hard to unwind that sometimes. So as a parent of an unschooler, it's really challenging. And I'm working with that all the time. I'm looking at that and seeing, well, is that my true voice responding, or is that the voice of my father, or is that the voice of my school teachers, or is that some idea that was planted in my head that I don't actually agree with in my heart? And usually the answer is it's somebody else's voice. So that's an interesting exercise to really work with that on a constant basis, and unschooling allows me to really come face to face with that all the time.
I'm really glad you brought that up. That segues perfectly into moving over to Scott, because Scott, you have a background of working with parents and supporting parents, probably through processes like this. And I think this whole panel, I think we're going to talk a little bit more. Let's first talk about your background and what you do to support parents. But after that, I want to talk a little bit about kind of the deschooling process that we all have to go through to be better support for our parents. For our children. Excuse me. But first, Scott, why don't you tell us a little bit about how you support other parents?
Well, my path is somewhat similar to Jeremy's in that I didn't quite want to be a rock star, but I loved the arts and music. I did actually. I had my best friend was a rock star locally, and he and I became roommates after I dropped out of college, and so I got to enjoy that vicariously. But I too was interested in music and art, and that's sort of how I kept myself engaged in my early or late teens and early 20s. Hold on, I'm getting to something good here. What was the question again? So anyway, the point is, I just wanted to acknowledge that there's this drive toward creative expression, especially in late adolescence or early and late adolescence, that it's so strong. It can lead to all kinds of wonderful things. For me, it led to, I did actually work as a professional singer for many years, and I was only in a rock band once, like for one gig. It was like, we threw together a band for this gig, but the rest of the time I did things like musical theater. I was in an opera. I sang with a big band. I did a lot of different genres of music, and there wasn't a lot of money in it. So I started a career as a voice teacher, and I apprenticed with my voice teacher, and did that for 15 years. Well, as I was doing that work, I became more and more interested in working with people who have this sort of suppressed creativity, and to help them bring it out. So I started to call my work holistic voice lessons, and I would help people connect with their freedom to really express themselves the way they wanted to, and also be able to give them skills to do that as well. But it was sort of an inside job and an outside job. And that, working one-on-one with mostly adults who had these dreams and helping them fulfill them, is essentially how I learned the skill set for coaching. And then when I got into parenting and interacting with parent support networks, that just sort of segued very naturally. And eventually, I would just sort of freely support people in those parenting online groups, and eventually people started asking me to work one-on-one with them, and that's how I became a parent coach. But I didn't go to college to study coaching.
Can you talk?
Everything?
Yeah, can you share what path parenting, what your process is, because it really touches my heart. It speaks to me, all the virtues that you tap into as you work with other parents.
Well, my initial influence was the continuum concept, which I'm sure everyone here knows about. It's a book by Jean Liedloff, who back in the 1950s, she, through strange circumstances, found herself hanging out with Stone Age people in the middle of the Amazon jungle. And by spending time with them, she learned that they had a whole different way of interacting with their children, and that it seemed to really support their well-being, and there was no conflict between generations, and none of that stuff that we take for granted in modern life. These children were very, very well. They were very well. So anyway, so that was what influenced my early parenting, and the early work that I did with, getting together with other people online and sharing support. And over time, what I realized was that these people who were trying to apply what they had learned from these observations of indigenous people was a little bit too literal, and that in order to really gain the benefit of the way that these people nurture their children, you can't just do what they do, but you have to think the way they think, and you have to take on a different worldview. So this goes back to what Teresa was saying about a different kind of a shift between a domination mindset, which is pervasive in our culture, to more of a partnership mindset, which is very much more common in these indigenous cultures. And so there's a lot to be learned from them. And it's not just about how they relate with each other, but it's how they relate with life. So we've been conditioned to think in terms of separation and control. And but our ancestors had a whole different way of relating with life. It was all about connectedness and partnership, so that we're we have these connections to each other, to nature, to the past and the future. It's a very different way of perceiving yourself, because you're in this web of relatedness instead of this isolation that is what we all take for granted, this individualism. So what I've done is try to help parents to shift into that mindset, so that when they make these choices to parent in different ways, it's not just following a set of rules, but it's following something that feels like it taps into their deeper humanity. And so over the years, I've distilled it into 4 principles: partnership, authenticity, trust, and heart. And between those 4 things, you can kind of cover all the bases. Of course, there's a lot of different ways that you can look at it, but I find that having a simple framework really makes it easy for a parent who is under stress to slow down, take a step back, think about, how do I need to shift here? And in the PATH framework, it's all about partnership, which is reconnecting with your power through connection, by making connections, whether it's connecting to yourself, connecting to your child, connecting to a higher power, connecting to nature, whatever it is that makes you feel connected, will shift your consciousness into a mode that is more likely to lead to positive outcomes. So it's a positive pathway to power. And then these other positive pathways include authenticity, which brings you to power through alignment. And when you get into alignment with your higher self, or your innermost being, or your inner guidance, or whatever you want to call it, but the sense of who you really are when you're not just being bombarded by the voices of society, the voices of your parents, or what they say. Getting into alignment with your innermost being is what brings you to a place of authenticity. And when you're in that place, you have much more power in relationship with your children. They trust you more. They feel more secure, because you're not tugging yourself in multiple directions. So that's the second path. The third path is trust, which is a pathway to power through understanding. So when you understand human nature, when you understand life in general, the more you understand things, the less you worry about things. And so this particular pathway is in some ways the more intellectual, because instead of just tuning in with your inner guidance, it's about, what outer resources do I need to line up with, so that I can feel like I understand the situation well enough that I can let go of my anxiety and trust my child, and trust the developmental processes of life and that sort of thing. And finally, heart is just sort of my abbreviation for unconditional love. And that is a pathway to an extraordinary kind of power, because when you love unconditionally, it's like creating something from nothing. And we've been taught that love is this thing that is conditional, that when someone does something nice, then you feel love, or when someone meets your expectations, then your heart is open. And if you can open your heart and generate feelings of love for no reason at all, without putting conditions on it, then you have access to all this power. And people don't usually think of love as power, but really it is. If you think about what moves people, and especially what moves children, love has to be right there at the top of the list, because who doesn't want to be loved?
Wow, that's incredible. When I gave the intro, I talked about the definition of unschooling, and unschooling really is about letting your child lead. And if you didn't have all of those principles activated already as a part of your life, it would be hard to be the support, the facilitator, the allower to watch your child go through their own process, to fail, to succeed, to make mistakes, to trust, to be there. I see how you've broken down each of these principles. They're foundations that every unschooling parent needs. I truly believe it. I saw Teresa nodding her head many times as Scott was speaking. And Teresa, I think you've got a lot to add to this conversation. I know when Scott brought up worldviews, you were there was something there that I knew that you wanted to talk about. Do you want to take over?
Sure, though I love listening to Scott and hearing what he has to say. And I think, there were so many things going through my mind as he was talking, and I was thinking about how that really resonated with me. And one of the thoughts that I had is that, when we are in systems of domination where power is used over us, and all of us live within those systems, we become the use of power and domination becomes invisible, right? Because it's just part of what we experience. And then there are also times when it's very palpable, like Jeremy talked about his story in high school, which was really clear about, people not listening, not paying attention. What he thought and believed about himself and what he wanted was not valued. So there are times when we hit up against that. And then there are other times when we just don't see it, but it operates all the time, around us in sometimes very invisible ways. And I think that ability to become conscious and use tools that allow us to be conscious of the ways we've internalized power and control and domination, and that we even use it on ourselves, is really a powerful tool that we can develop as parents who are trying to facilitate a child's process, and yet we haven't lived that process. So we're doing it for ourselves at the same time that we're also doing that with the children who share our lives. And so that dynamic, even as Jeremy talked about, I had a struggle today that I was thinking about, which was really tied to ways power had been used over me as a child, that I was triggered. And, when I saw that thread that linked back to the ways I felt disempowered or afraid as a child, then I could do the bit of grieving I needed to do in that moment. It was short. And then really embrace the fact that, I could integrate that experience and make sense of it, and then understand the ways in which the youngest child in my life triggered me was really a result of my own disempowerment and pain from my childhood. So there's so many things I feel like I could say, but, I think that's just all of those kinds of tools that help us create awareness about how it lives within us, about the expectations we set for ourselves about how we need to be as parents, this perfectionism, and then we beat ourselves up when we're not the parent that we want to be. All of those tools are things that we've internalized from growing up within systems that use power and control and domination. And so that liberation is really what I see as the key. Liberating ourselves and creating that space so children remain liberated. And if they haven't been liberated, in the case of my oldest son, where he was definitely not liberated in the first years of his life, that sort of coming back to that and beginning that process of reconnecting and being accountable for my own actions toward him, and then understanding how it is we move forward from that and create a liberatory space for adults and children.
Yeah, very well said. And it's interesting that during Jeremy, his introduction to what led him to unschooling, he talked about, his path, but also talked about watching his daughter have the freedom that he wishes he had. And so I think freedom is one of those things that we wish, we wish for our children, yet not having that experience ourselves, it does trigger us. It does trigger. And I think that we should bring this back around to talking about how we go through deschooling ourselves as parents so we can be better facilitators for our unschooled children. And Scott absolutely brought up ways that we can do it. Teresa, you talked about, dealing with your triggers. Is there anything that you can add, Teresa, about strategies that parents can use as they're going through this deschooling process?
Yeah. I think that one of the pieces, some of the strategies that I have found really work well with parents that I am working with is this understanding and Scott talked about connection, and there are so many ways in which we become disconnected from ourselves and our intuition, our heart, our feelings, even our own bodies. And so I think tools that allow us to, in those moments when we're feeling discomfort, with something the child's doing or something that's happening around us, that allow us to do multiple ways of reconnecting to ourselves, whether it's to where we hold discomfort and tension in our bodies, understanding the thoughts, the automatic thoughts that go through our heads when we're in those moments of tension with the child, and even acknowledging the full range of feelings that we experience as parents that we were often punished for expressing as children. And so those pieces to me, I think are parts of the tools that can help us reconnect to ourselves and understand our experiences and how they're the moments that are in the present full of tension and that are uncomfortable for us are moments where we can integrate past experiences where we may have experienced some pain, but also then bring us back to the present moment so that we can be with the child in our lives for them at the same time that we're creating what we need for ourselves. It's this balance of giving ourselves what we need and not asking the child to take care of our needs. We have to do that for ourselves, and simultaneously allowing them to have the process they need to have and facilitating that and supporting that in the ways they need as opposed to the ways we need it to happen.
That's powerful. That's really, really powerful. I'm glad you brought that up. Has anybody on this panel read a recent article on the Huffington Post that talked about connectedness? It said, and I don't have the link, I read it maybe 2 weeks ago, and it said that the cause of addictions is lack of connection. And to me, that was the most powerful thing I've read in 2-3 years. That lack of connectedness is the thing that brought me to unschooling, because I had that growing up in my life. I didn't know what I was seeking was unschooling, but I was seeking a path that allowed me to connect with my child, which was the number one thing that triggers me, that all of that drives me. It's all of the things that I didn't have. It taught me to be a better parent. But connectedness is such a powerful tool. Did anybody on this panel happen to read that article, Huffington Post? No. Okay, I'll circulate it.
I didn't read it, but interestingly, I just bumped into the work of Tiffany Shlain, who I don't know if any of you know her. She's not really a parenting person per se, but she made a documentary. Actually, you might know her, Jeremy, because she lives in the Bay Area. She made a documentary called Connected, and yeah.
I do know of her. I've never met her, but I know who she is. Yeah.
And she was, and I didn't even know she existed until I realized that she's the daughter of this brilliant man whose work I have recommended to people. Her father, Leonard Shlain, was the author of a book called The Alphabet versus the Goddess, which actually could lead to an interesting conversation about unschooling, because his thesis in his book is that literacy in some ways is the cause of the sort of the domination system, and particularly the oppression of women and the feminine. So he has this brilliant presentation that he gives. You can find it online if you go to YouTube and search for the Alphabet versus the Goddess. Anyway, I recommend that to everyone, because one thing that, and I'm kind of going off on a tangent, but we can do that, right? Okay.
Sure. Go off on a tangent.
Well, one thing that his work really did for me was relieve my anxiety about my kids being late readers, because as an unschooler, one of the principles that you follow is to trust your child's developmental process, to not impose some externally determined developmental process on your child, including things like learning to read, or the stuff that we're taught to believe a child has to learn reading before they're 5 or 6, or they'll be behind for the rest of their lives. And my experience, my kids are teenagers now, and that wasn't the case at all. But still, as they were getting older and older and still not fluent readers, I worried about it. But in The Alphabet versus the Goddess, he basically said you can conclude from his ideas that in some ways kids are better off if they learn their literacy much later, because because literacy causes you to your left brain to be more intensified, and it takes the attention or the energy away from your right brain and your right brain modes of thinking, and so that you actually have a better chance of being a whole brain thinker if you don't overstimulate the left brain by teaching literacy before the child is ready. And some children are ready, they're 3 or 4 or whatever, and I don't have a problem with that. The point is the child determined, they let you know, they gave you the signals, I'm ready to learn to read, or usually they just do it spontaneously. But if you say, oh, you're already 6, you're already 7, you should be reading now, then you're not trusting that process by which their own inner development determines the optimum path for a holistic kind of developmental process.
Yeah, and all kids are different. I mean, everybody knows that, but it's about trusting that process. That is so true. I want to shift gears a little bit, and I want to switch over to Jeremy. Jeremy, you became a storyteller, and the story that you told in your film, Class Dismissed, is powerful. And I have to tell you, I watched the film. Mm-hmm. Tears of joy sprang from my eyes. I was so moved by the way that you told this story. Why did you feel compelled, first of all, to tell this kind of story? And maybe, we're going to take a break in just a little bit and see the trailer. And so the audience who hasn't seen your film will get the chance to at least be introduced to it. But can you premise what inspired you to tell this kind of story?
Yeah, sure. So, as I mentioned earlier, when we first started unschooling our daughter, I was looking around for all kinds of information, reading books and, trying to figure out what this was all about. And I thought, well, there's got to be some sort of documentary out there, that really sort of helps illuminate some of these possibilities and some of these different approaches. And I couldn't find anything. And at the same time that I started making the film, there were 2 other documentaries about education that were out there. One was Race to Nowhere, and the other one was Waiting for Superman. And I'd seen both of them, and, they were good documentaries, but they were really stuck in the box. And in fact, I saw Waiting for Superman in the theater, and there were several times in the film that I wanted to shout, "Unschooling!" because they just weren't looking outside of that box. So anyway, I thought, well, it doesn't seem like there's any documentary out there about this, so I'm going to make one. And so that's when I started. And then in terms of telling the specific story of the family in the film, our main kind of family that we follow in the film, I always felt, as I was putting the film together or thinking about what the film would be, I always felt very strongly that probably one of the most effective ways to really help other parents who are considering homeschooling or unschooling would be if they could witness a journey of a family and kind of witness all of the struggle and the ups and downs that kind of goes with it, so that, at the end of the day, hopefully, and of course I didn't know what was going to happen, But hopefully at the end of the day, they could say, well, look, if they can do it, then we could maybe do it too. So I felt like following a real family, doing real things would be the most effective way to kind of communicate some of the challenges that come up, some of the the fear that you work with, some of the successes that happen, and the breakthroughs. And so that's kind of how I sort of settled on that. And, I'd already gone around and interviewed quote unquote experts who had been doing this for a long time. And I had lots of talking heads, but I had no real narrative story. And so I thought, well, I'll put out a casting call through Facebook. We were building a Facebook following at that point, and to see if I can find a family. And I thought, well, this is going to be a pretty tall order, because I was looking for a family that had kids in school, who were unhappy, who were willing to pull them out, to homeschool them or unschool them or find whatever path was going to work for them. And the kids had to be of a certain age so that they could be, coherent on camera and so on. They couldn't be, toddlers or whatever. So I thought, well, this is going to be really hard. I got 150 responses from all over the country. I was completely bowled over. I couldn't believe it. And some of the stories that people shared with me were really amazing. All kinds of reasons that they were unhappy with school, and that they were, looking at homeschooling, or, trying to figure out what they were going to do next. So I had to boil it all down to one particular family. And I happened to find this family in Los Angeles who so many blessings to them. I'm so grateful for them sharing their lives with me for that 2-year period that I followed them. And and it was perfect. They were right at the edge of pulling the girls out, and I got to be there at the beginning of the process and follow their journey for 2 years. So that's kind of how it all came to be. And it was quite an adventure for me too, because as I said, I really didn't know what was going to happen. I just had to let the story unfold. And try to also stay out of the way. It was very tempting for me at times, and you've seen the film, so there's some periods where they're really questioning what they're doing. Like, is this the right thing? Should we do something else? And have we made the right choices? And it was tempting for me to step in and say, well, yeah, you should do this, or talk to these people and do that. And I just tried to sit back and just let them figure that out, and try to document that process so that it could be as real as possible. And from the feedback that we've been getting, it seems to have worked, because I've had many families come up to me after screenings and said, oh gosh, that's so much in my journey, or I related so much to this part of the journey. And new families too, who are not yet homeschooling or unschooling, who were considering it, felt really invigorated and ready to make the leap after seeing the film, because they related so directly to Rachel and her family in the film. So I'm very, very grateful that for them, and for that it all worked out.
Yeah, it's a great film, and I so recommend it. And it was almost as if it was an honor to watch these girls grow up, and to so candidly go through this process with them. Let's actually take a break now and watch the trailer for the film, and we'll come back and talk about everybody else's process too. So Biggie, let's roll that.
I've always really liked to learn, but school brought on a lot of stress, and I just felt like I was kind of failing as a student.
She was so excited to learn when she was little, and I've been just seeing it plummet.
Our kids just come home grumpy, overworked, and craziest amount of busy homework.
School's like something that I always dread going to, because you're going to be stuck in a classroom sitting there for hours and hours.
There was no time to clean their rooms. I couldn't ask them to help me unload the dishwasher or vacuum a room. They were too busy. They literally were always doing schoolwork.
My world revolved around school, and that was all that there was.
It really made me start to think and question what we were doing, and made me wonder about what other alternatives there were. I just thought, I don't think we buy into this anymore.
Finally, I hit my breaking point. And I was like, I don't want to go to school anymore.
Many parents do not realize that they have options, and they don't even feel like they have a right to have much of a say in their children's education.
The very first thing you need to do is think outside the box of the school. Think outside the conventional notions of what learning is.
Times are changing. Schools are not. And parents want to know, well, what can I give my child if the salvation of school is really just an empty promise? You know, what is it? And then they realize, me, my family, my community.
The idea that kids are this entire human being and are interacting with the world, not just a teacher in a classroom, is still new to so many adults.
The best way to have an impact in the direction of the education revolution is to go outside the system.
Yeah, so I hope everybody enjoyed that trailer, and I hope that it inspires you to get out there and actually see the film if you can. It's amazing. It's not just about unschooling, even though the topic of this particular show tonight is unschooling. It's about the path that everybody or that this family takes to find what educational alternative works for them, and the documentary demonstrates trying lots of different types of paths and paradigms and curriculums and all different types. She dips her big toe in, this family dips their big toe into all these different ways to educate their children. I want to shift gears a little bit, and I actually want to talk about education and learning. As unschoolers, we don't break down the days into subjects, and we don't create different we don't create a division into our learning. How do you deal with that as parents, with the confidence knowing that your children are getting what they need? And I want to jump over to you, Teresa.
What I would say is, I don't know that confidence is a requirement. So, I think there are plenty of times when I question what I'm doing, I question my trust, I question my faith. It's really not a leap of faith because they have shown over and over and over what's right for them. But I think others outside might see it as a leap of faith to trust that your children learn how to read when they're ready and on their own. So I think that if I can stay grounded and present in the moment about what it is they need, and sometimes what they need is for me to not be there, and, to not always necessarily be involved, then I think that, and just to watch them and observe them and really see who they are. Like, if I can see the core of who they are and just honor that in whatever ways I can in that moment. Sometimes it's more honoring and sometimes it's less honoring, and it's certainly a spectrum. But I think that, my work, I feel like I'm rambling, but my work as a parent is to really deal with my own shit. Can I say shit? To deal with my own shit. And
you can say shit.
Okay. So to really deal with what's going on for me so that I can be present for them. And the more that I can deal with my discomfort and understand where that comes from and understand why I'm triggered and all of those pieces, the more then they're allowed and given freedom to do what they need to do. And, I think it looks a lot of different ways depending on the day and what they want to be focused on. And, it's just about me being clear that I have my process I have to take care of, and I can support them in whatever process they need in that moment.
I'm so glad you said that confidence is not needed, because I found in the beginning of our process, I didn't have any of that. But what I did have is the one thing that you tapped into is presence. And for us, travel is what gave us that gift. So maybe Scott, you can share some of your process or what it is that gives you, I don't want to say confidence, but knowing that you're going down a path that really supports your kids' learning.
Well, first I want to appreciate Teresa for saying a bunch of good shit.
I love it.
And I think for me, it's I think it is confidence, but it's a different kind of confidence than what we normally think of as confidence, because we normally base confidence on a kind of an intellectual kind of, or an analytical kind of way of thinking, and a cause and effect. You know, if my child has achieved this milestone, then they can achieve that milestone. And the school system kind of has trained us to think in that linear way. And but there's a different kind of I don't want to call it confidence, I want to call it knowing. And there's a way in which you can connect, and it's more of a gut feeling of like, I know my kids are intelligent, and I know they have this intelligence, and in some ways it's raw, but I see the way, I'm constantly seeing ways in which their intelligence is blossoming that I didn't expect. I have tons of examples. Like my wife and I are both singers, and we wanted our kids to have music. But because we were unschoolers, we weren't going to teach them. We wanted to allow them to learn to take that on in whatever natural way happened. And so my older daughter, I remember when she was about 4 or 5, she didn't really ever sing in tune. And all the other kids who had been taught, taking the music and me classes and being instructed in the nursery rhymes and that sort of thing, they all were singing the correct notes. and my daughter was singing the wrong notes. And I thought, maybe we should be teaching her, But again, I connected with that feeling. It's like, well, but something's right here. Like, I feel something right. And what I felt was that even though she didn't sing the right notes, she sang the wrong notes soulfully. You know what I mean? Like, she had this artistic flair that's like, well, something's right there. And who am I to say that she has to learn the way I did? I learned to sing notes first, and then I learned later as a teenager how to sing them with flair, right? But she learned to sing it with this artistry before she learned to actually sing the correct notes. And it's like, okay. And then, later, I don't even remember, but just one day I noticed, oh, she's always singing in tune now. And she's much older, but she had developed this artistic flair that was just in place. And she had this beautiful natural artistry. And I was so grateful that I didn't interfere with her unique developmental process there, because what often happens is that you take a kid and you say, no, and I'm using singing as an example because I know it, but it could be with anything. And you say, no, that's wrong. This is the right way to do it. And you push them to understand it in the way you think they should understand it. And then they get all this tension around it and judgment, and they have to build defenses for their ego because there's a kind of a rejection inherent in that. And all of that sort of undermines this natural creative developmental process. And by having this faith in whatever that feeling was in myself, and to trust the process, here we have this wonderful, amazing singer. I wish I instead of the trailer, I think you should let me play music videos of my daughter. Actually, we should play Kaya too. Jeremy's daughter is a brilliant musician as well. I think we should all just get together and form a band. That's what I'm really saying.
If I could add on to...
Singing.
Go ahead.
Let's just all sing for the rain. Sorry, Teresa.
Oh no, that's all right. I was thinking about what Scott was saying and thinking about that broader social context for how it is, that worldview of children. And the worldview that we internalize is that children only can learn what they're taught, that they aren't natural learners, that they have to be disciplined, they have to be motivated by rewards or punishment, that there's not this internal motivation that's part of them. And so I think our ability to recognize those as biases and stereotypes against children that lead us to not trust who and what they are, because all children have that. All children have that natural desire to learn. It's our imposition of this belief about the nature of children that is socially constructed. It's really about a system of education that convinces us that this is the only way that children can learn. And for me, as we can pull that apart and say, that's what we are taught, but that is not necessarily the truth of how learning happens and how individuals grow in to be the full human beings that they can be.
Yeah, amazing. So what do you think about modeling? What do you think about modeling, as a form of teaching, even though we're not teaching because we're not teachers? I mean, is that something, Jeremy talked about, leaving school and creating his own path. And, to me, I was thinking immediately, he's modeling how to take control of your own destiny, and to question authority. And I always taught my son to do so by doing the same thing, not by telling him to do it. So what do you think of modeling as a form of facilitating learning?
Well, can I jump in here? So, I want to speak to what you just said there, Lainey, but also I want to back up a little bit to something Teresa said about questioning, that we question what we're doing sometimes as parents. And, for me, it's interesting. I'm always fascinated with this idea of, knowing and not knowing. And I'm actually more interested in not knowing than I am with knowing. And I know that sounds like a strange paradox, but I did, I've been involved in Zen Buddhist meditation for a long time, and I studied with a Japanese Zen master for many years, and his favorite expression was, not knowing is most intimate. And when I first heard that, I didn't know what he was talking about, but he kept saying it. And that formed the foundation of all of his teaching. And I realized later on, and especially now that I'm kind of working with this very directly, this feeling of not knowing, I understand now what he means. Because if we don't question, if we're not engaged with that feeling of uncomfortableness of like, is this right? Should we be doing something different? Like, I don't know what to do. If we're not engaged with that, then we're only kind of half living. And there's something about that engagement that is so present and forces you to be present. Because, as an example, like if you send your kids off to school, then you don't really have to question what's going on. You assume that they're getting an education, right? And unless you're an incredibly engaged parent, you're just going to go, oh, yeah, they're taking care of it. I don't have to worry about that or question it. So to me, there's a whole element there of parenting then that's missing. And, as unschoolers, we're kind of right up against that all the time, these questions. And I don't know what to do next. And I don't know if we should change anything. Is she learning anything? I don't know. And then am I comfortable with that? Can I be okay with that? And I love that process. It's really difficult sometimes, but it's also really wonderful when I allow myself to completely let go into that feeling of not knowing. Because as my old Zen teacher said, not knowing is most intimate. And then I feel really intimate with myself, with the process, with my daughter. And there's this incredible dynamic that's happening because we're engaged and we're present. So I just wanted to say that because I really loved what Teresa said about that, the idea of just kind of allowing those questions to be there and being okay that we don't always know. And then the modeling, yeah, of course, I think that kids learn from modeling more than any other way, probably. and I know I've seen that directly in my experience when I'm modeling grumpiness or irritability, then what do I get back? Grumpiness and irritability. Kids are like a mirror. I mean, my daughter's my greatest teacher. Forget my Zen master. She's my Zen master. I mean, it's amazing. And to use the word shit again, when I put shit out there, I get shit back directly from her, and it's shocking. And then I go, well, where's that coming from? And then I realize, well, it's me. I'm modeling this. Of course she's going to model it back. So then I get into that whole thing again of questioning, well, gosh, I should be doing something different, or how can I change things, and what can I model to, so it's a really wonderful dynamic.
Yeah.
I think for me, I think a lot about that, but I also think the best modeling I can do is to just be human and to come into the day and figure out, oh, what am I doing? And sometimes I don't know. And, how is it I can have my full experience and then also model for myself what it means to be present in my own life? Because really the modeling that needs to be done is for me. Like, I'm learning how to be fully present and human in ways that they know because they've had more freedom to do it. So I kind of think of modeling in that way.
I like the idea that modeling is, it's what's happening all the time. And it's more often than not, especially in traditional schooling, the teaching that's happening is not what's intended, because they aren't focused on what they're modeling. They're focused on some agenda. And mostly what they're modeling is how to have an agenda, or how to dominate people. And it's it's no wonder that kids come out of school, mostly what they've learned is how to have a very elaborate toolbox of defenses and or weapons, to use to dominate and control. And that's what's modeled in compulsory education, where it's backed up by some sort of threat or force. And I think one of the best lessons of unschooling or freedom-based education is that you're modeling freedom, you're modeling respect, you're modeling partnership, you're modeling compassion, you're modeling thoughtfulness and empathy. And there's so many things that are part of the process that are really, when you think about it, the most important life lessons you can learn. It's amazing to me that more kids don't come out of forced schooling with really serious antisocial. As I say this, I'm realizing the answer to my question. It's that the reason that more people aren't antisocial coming out of schools is because they become anti-self. The schools they undermine your trust in yourself. But it really is anti-life in a way. And the beautiful thing about unschooling or leaving the control-based system is how it reconnects you with life, and that's a great model. I don't know what else we need to model. Just connection.
Yeah, and we come back to connection, don't we? And how important that is. I don't think I felt empowered in my life until I left the system and left the home. And it's a shame that my entire developmental stages through adolescence, through childhood, through adolescence, there was never a sense of empowerment. How sad is that? How sad we're living in a society where that is the norm. You go through a system and you're disempowered. And I think that almost goes back to, why don't we bring social justice into children's rights? We don't look at children as being disempowered, but they are. They truly are, unless they're going through a childhood of being unschooled, I feel. I mean, I'm sure there's other examples, but this is the one that I know and this panel knows. Yeah, I think it's powerful. And also, Scott, you talked about partnering with your children, partnering with yourself, but partnering with the learning. Does anybody on the panel want to talk about what the partnering, give some examples of what the partnering looks like in their lives?
I think that where I'm struggling is I'm trying to go back to what partnering looked like in the beginning, because now I feel like after 7 years of doing it, it's much more sort of inherent in the ways in which we relate to each other. But I was thinking in particular about something Jeremy said, where when children go to school, there are ways in which I'm going to frame it in a different way. When we control children and we limit their choices and we put them on certain paths, and that could be whether it's going to school or, I was thinking in my own fear-based parenting, media, access to media and allowing, any kind of access to media with the first child in my life, the oldest, Martel. And I know the process that I went through was having to confront that I was fearful and begin to let go of control. But then I had to be willing to engage. And that's what I hadn't been doing. By setting up controls and saying to him, well, you can watch anything you want to on PBS. Right? Like, I just let him go. Oh, then I know it's safe and it's good if you watch PBS, and there's nothing I need to be worried about. And it was when I began to let go of that and, he had free access that suddenly I was partnering. Like, oh, I want to sit with you and let's watch what you're watching. I want to understand why it is you're attracted to these shows that create all this fear for me. And what is my fear about? And really began engaging with him about his own worldview. And that's what began the process of partnership for me, was this curiosity about, why do I hate what he's watching so much? And why does he love it so much? And then how can we bridge that gap and how can I bridge that gap? Not him. He had no interest in what my perspective was, which is fine. And I think that's great because he had heard a lot of it for the first 5 years of his life. Now it was time for me to begin to understand his perspective. And for me, partnership in learning is all about being willing to really see the world as much as I can from their point of view and to really begin to take on their perspective. And then when I can do that, I'm a better partner, because then I can maybe look at ways that I support them more fully or get out of their way if that's what they want.
Yeah, that's that's really important too, and I like what you said there at the end about being willing to see the world through their perspective. And that's something that I come up with over and over again. Especially around music. I was a musician, is very involved in music, and it's hard for me sometimes to interact what she listens to, and so she'll listen to stuff that I think is just crap. Like, this is the worst. Like, why are you listening to this? Horrible. Listen to this, and then I realized, well, no, she's getting out of the song that she's listening to the same thing that I got out of the music that I listened to, that my parents told me, what are you listening to that rubbish for? But the difference being in that when I was a kid and listened to, like, I'd have Led Zeppelin on really loud or Genesis or something, and my dad would say, well, what kind of rubbish is that? And then he wasn't even willing to listen to it at all. And so what I have to find myself doing with Kaya is that she'll listen to like Taylor Swift or something. I'm just like, ugh. And then I found myself kind of bottled on going, hey, it's pretty good. This is kind of catchy. And then the other day she caught me singing it. And then I realized, wow, okay, yeah, I'm really learning to kind of accept that for her, this is what gets her up. This is exciting for her. This is the music that's really speaking to her right now, and that's okay. But it's challenging for sure.
Yeah, I had a similar situation where I had to watch video games, and it wasn't something that really excited me. And I found myself being triggered by being challenged with my time. But that's what I wanted to be doing. Kept telling myself, little devil over here and a little angel over here. But you want to be spending time with your child. Watches video games. That's what excites him. And the little angels say, yeah, but you could be doing something productive. And so, like, these were the conversations that was going on in my own head. And so I had to learn a lot. This was my deschooling process. This is my deschooling process about what attached, connected parenting looked like. So, yeah.
It's funny when you first brought up the topic of partnership. Of course, that's like one of the words I use the most in my writing, and I'm just thinking about my own life and family and my partnership within my family. I actually have to kind of take a step back to even see it. It's sort of like, after a while, it becomes like water to a fish. It's just it's the water you swim in, the water of partnership. And but I'd say, so it's getting to know more and more how connected you are, and being on the same side. I think we have all these conditioned reactions to take an opposing perspective. This is why I love how Teresa and Jeremy are talking about the importance of taking the perspective of your child, because that puts you on their side. And you put literally in their shoes. And, well, not literally, so I don't wear my children's shoes, but I think it can be just as simple as recognizing that you'd rather be on their side than in opposition, that you don't want to be you don't ever want to be their adversary. You always want to be their ally. And that doesn't mean you necessarily agree, or that you think that's a good song that you should listen to, or that you agree with playing a certain video game or watching a certain show or eating certain food or all these other things that we worry about. You don't have to agree with those things to stay connected and to stay on their side. You can take their perspective. That doesn't mean you have to give up your own. And the essence of partnership is being able to bring these two perspectives together and experience a kind of interconnectedness where we are separate and we're one. That's it. That's the essence of partnership. And I guess for me, that I've just gotten used to that. Like that's just we don't. I mean, we still quibble and we have our conflicts and stuff. We get disconnected over silly things often, but mostly we feel connected, and that isn't something that is like because we have some special talent. It's because it's a skill that we developed, and it's certainly, I would say, we developed it over many years. And I feel like I want to speak to parents of younger children who may be experiencing a lot of strife with their kids, a lot of feeling like they're not on the same side, and just to say that you don't have to fix that 100%. You can move in the direction of partnership bit by bit, and it's kind of and for me, it's been this. It's like a just-in-time process. I just get just enough of a stronger connection, strengthening the connection, strengthening the skill of seeing each other's perspectives and working with each other instead of against each other, All those things are skills that I've built over the years. And now that they're teenagers, it's just like everything is so easy. You know what I'm talking about, Lainey, right? It's like, it's just so easy. But it was because of that investment in the early years. And there were points at which I could have given up and said, oh, this partnership thing doesn't work. But by saying, well, if it's good enough to just get a little bit better every day, and then the partnership got stronger and stronger and stronger, and you start to have these cumulative effects where now you're not just not fighting, but you're actually co-creating, you're working together. It becomes less like a struggle and more like a dance. And just like dancing, it's a skill that you get better and better at. I don't know. That's not. I like to give concrete examples, but I really think that I hope the people listening to this will get will feel like they can trust that little progress. You know what I mean? Just a little bit of moving forward, moving toward feeling a little more connected. And each day that just builds and builds and builds. And pretty soon it just works.
Yeah, and you brought up some good points. I mean, it's really, really important to have those pieces in place as the teen years come in order to be able to continue a sense of partnership. But I have to say, I don't know how all you non-traveling people do this, because travel to me is the act of having that joint thing that you're doing together that requires activity and presence and partnership and decision making. And again, being present. I mean, I couldn't do it. I couldn't find that place in conventional stationary life. So I don't know how you non-traveling people do it, but you guys are all doing a really good job.
You know, I think one of the things that I was reflecting on with what Scott was saying and about perspective taking, it took me back to a lot of the tools that we use around social justice, to take it to a social justice perspective. But, so much of that is being willing to interrogate our own worldview and perspective so that we're able to step outside of it and then step into a different perspective. And for me, and, what I really try to get parents to do is to see it as a daily practice. Like, it is a practice, and it's a commitment to a practice. And it doesn't mean we do it well every day. And it doesn't mean maybe it doesn't happen every day, right? It's not a perfect practice. That's why it's called practice. You're over and over. Our task is to be willing to understand, what are we not seeing? And then what are the blinders that we have? How do I understand what is transparent, because it's so much a part of how I grew up, so that I can then step out of it and see that other perspective. For me, parenting is like that travel every day. It is about being able to say to myself, my perspective is not the right perspective all the time. I want to be right a lot, but it's really not. And it's my perspective. And so how is it I make my perspective more, visible to myself, and even talk about that with them. So if we're in some disagreement, I think a great tool for parents is to be able to say, I'm struggling with seeing that perspective. I'm not sure how I'm going to, but I'm going to try to figure it out, right? To model that we come from life in our sets of experiences, and that creates the framework from which we approach life. And the more that we can begin to question that and look through it, not look through it, but see it for what it is, the more then that we can engage in our own learning process of being able to take different perspectives and seeing those as truly valid and real and important for the people that we're with.
Absolutely. And having the ability to peel back the layers of these particular worldviews and determine which are cultural, which are through my particular lenses because of my family, my preferences, all these other layers that are there, which are the ones that are given to me that I take, and which are the ones that I'm choosing to shed. And that's a powerful tool. We work a lot with teens during our unschooling, world schooling retreats, because again, travel allows us to look through these different lenses, through the lens of the people in our host countries. And I could see how that's a powerful tool to bring that back into the family as well. So thank you so much, Teresa, for bringing that up. That's something that I'm so absolutely passionate about. Anybody else have any thoughts about worldviews? Jeremy?
You got called on.
Aha.
I got called on. Worldviews, yeah.
I didn't see him raise his hand.
Yeah, let me raise my hand. Me.
There it is.
I have something to say. Worldviews. I mean, yeah, that's interesting. I'm not sure quite how to respond to that. I mean, obviously, my opinions are my opinions, and nothing more than that often, And so when I'm working with Kaya or dealing with Kaya, talking with Kaya in some way, that's my opinion, and she probably has an entirely different way of thinking about it. But yeah, I don't know. I'm not sure what I'm trying to say here. I think I'm still struggling with your question.
Well, I called on you, so
yeah,
you weren't prepared, and that's fair.
I was zoning out there. Let me think about it some more.
Scott,
I think we should play a game. I don't know what the game is, but I feel like I want to. I mean, if speaking to the audience here, if you guys had been present on the pre-show here, we were having so much fun, and now we're trying to be serious and profound. But let's just talk about stuff like, if we were hanging out at an unschooling conference, what would we be talking about? Or maybe there's a game. Or who was it that said they wanted to play Truth or Dare?
That was Lainey.
Well, you bring up unschooling conferences, and that's where I met you, Scott, and I'm actually going to meet Teresa at 2 of them coming up this year. But Jeremy, you started off your story into unschooling through meeting an unschooled child at an unschooling conference. And to me, that was the first conference that I went to. I've only been to one. And that was the first time I met a community of people that, the world thought was as crazy as I am. I found my people, I found my tribe, and to be in that kind of environment really, it made me feel that I was at home and I was finally on path. And so I don't know if anybody else had that feeling or have had that feeling meeting a group of unschoolers, but it's powerful. It's incredibly powerful.
Yeah, it totally is. Every time we go almost every year to that particular conference, and every time I go, I feel the same thing as you. Like this is our tribe, and you can just be yourself. Your kids can be themselves, and you're not surrounded by all these questions and people kind of questioning what you're doing, or commenting on what you're doing, or disagreeing with what you're doing. And there's a tremendous amount of freedom in that, and it just feels really good to be in that environment for sure.
The challenge is, as an introvert, I find them overwhelming, even though I go to them and I present. Yeah. And that I think, I think there's lots of ways to find support. So I think conferences are a really amazing experience. And then there are also other ways to connect with people that can, I find it hard to find the time that I need to recharge when I'm in those environments around so much energy. And at the same time, I love going to them. And then I'm exhausted at the end.
Well, this brings up the question of community, and I think we're social people, even if we're introverts, Teresa, which my son is an introvert, and I'm clearly an extrovert. So I've had to learn how to negotiate life in partnership with an introvert, and it's taught me a lot. But it's also taught me that we are social beings regardless of how we interact with the world, and community is so important. We need to feel supported and taken care of and understood if it's not just in our singular family unit. So I always urge people to seek out some form of community, and I think that conferences are one way. If it's too much, there's online community. And for us, we produce teen and family get-togethers in different places in the world, but it charges me, especially as an extrovert. What's your take on that one, Scott? You're called on.
Okay. Wow. So I'm an introvert also. In fact, my whole family is pretty introverted. And just to go back to your question about the travel, I think as an extrovert, that makes a lot of sense. As an introvert, a lot of our travel is interior. We are exploring the wide unexplored territories of thought and imagination. And I know that's not necessarily the definition of introversion, but I think we are comfortable spending a lot of time quiet and not necessarily interacting directly. Sometimes I'll go a whole day and realize I haven't interacted with one of my kids, and then try to sort of make up for it at the end of the day. But so we have this little tribe of 4, and it's definitely, in the big picture, the nuclear family is a disaster, and we really all need to find ways to connect and think outside the box of the nuclear family. I have to say, for my family, it works better than it would if we were all extroverts, because just being introverted, we kind of we've found this sort of groove with each other that is we've got the sort of the partnership thing down. And when you add new people to the mix, it gets more complex. And how many other people's perspectives do you need to consider? And because we have such diversity, and we're not like a conformist, none of us is interested in a being part of a conformist community. We want to be in a community that respects individuality, but then you have all this added complexity. So it does present quite a challenge, I think, to create community. I always like the idea of community growing organically, because I've seen so many projects fail because people have a big vision. And I actually did this once too, about 15 years ago, saying, we gotta build a community. We gotta, get together and buy some land and all this stuff. The whole communitarian movement it's a beautiful vision, but the practicality of it is that you can't go from we're barely managing the complexity of a nuclear family to this added complexity of many different families, many different points of view, many different needs and desires and beliefs and different kinds of baggage. It's so complicated that and what I learned from trying to do that many years ago was that it doesn't really work that way to create a grand vision and then try to just build it. That's sort of the way we think, about building a house, for example. You make a plan and then you build it. But this would be more like, houses aren't built this way, but if you built a house, like I'm just going to build a bedroom today. This month I'm going to build a bedroom. Next month I'm going to build a bathroom, and then we're going to see how that works. And then we're going to figure out where the kitchen might fit into this, and it would be this organic process of building or growing a community just like the way we don't build houses. But if you think about the strong communities that you have that you may not even call communities, but maybe a circle of friends or close associates or people that are your lifelong friends that, you know, maybe you get together once a year. You didn't put up a thing on a bulletin board and say, we're starting a community. You just, you know, you started with one strong connection, and then they had a strong connection, and then you grew close to them, and it's this constellation that grows. Like in my mind, it's like a crystal. You know how when you see these films of crystals where it crystallizes outward and it forms this beautiful structure, but it starts with just this little tiny molecule. And I think, so whatever you want to call that, I call it organically grown communities, but I really think that's the best way to start. And it's not so overwhelming, especially if you're introverted, to say, okay, I'm just going to look for one new friendship where we can go beyond the usual strong sense of separation and go into, you know, let's tear down some of these fences that are typically built between people if they're not in the same family, and become each other's honorary family. So you can walk in my house without knocking, for example, or you don't have to ask me to use my lawnmower, or, you know, silly things, but that tear down this harsh divide that we have between the nuclear family as a tribe, and expand it into, you know, something more resembling a real tribe. And I mean, that's sort of the communities movement, but I really think it's hugely important in unschooling, because kids really need that. They you know, we don't have the neighborhood unity that, at least that I had when I was a kid. There was always kids roaming around the neighborhood. And what do we have now? It's like, I don't even know the other kids, and they're going to public school, so my kids don't even have easy opportunities to meet them. So forgive me if I'm rambling, but I think, I guess what I'm getting at is the community is important for unschooling, just to meet your kids' needs to have this social stimulation and the opportunity to explore social intelligence with other children, especially other children that have that same level of freedom that they have, so that there's not this culture clash between the kids. But I think we as parents need it as well. And there's a lot of things that you can do to start to tear down those walls and question things like, you know, do I really love my children more than my best friend's children, or is love like this thing that doesn't have to have these levels? You know what I mean? Why can't I nurse my friend's child? You know. Things like that. It's like, oh, but that's like, even just the idea that it's my friend's child, you know, why isn't it my child? Or why isn't it our child? Like, so this shift in consciousness toward connectedness has you questioning even the words that we use to describe who we are. Is that person someone else's child, or are they in a way my child too? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And you bring up so many good points here. You talk about connectedness. You talk about really being in a different world. We're in a different world than when each of us grew up. It's a completely different world. And we're all of us on this panel are outside of the convention right now, even though we function within the society. You know, we're not outside in a community, although we're in Ecuador. But when you've got a movement of thinkers that are challenging the status quo, that are pushing the boundaries and creating a new paradigm, nothing is clear. We know that this is a different world. We know that the world that we grew up in is very different than how our children are growing up in terms of social consciousness, in terms of fear-based messaging, in terms of all of these other things. So I think for us, there's so many ways we can go with this, and unschooling is one of those preparations for creating a new paradigm, a new world, a new earth. I mean, I really believe this is a very important movement, and all of the things that we talked about, empowerment, connectedness, freedom, all of those things are at the foundation of creating a paradigm that's very different than the one that we're living in now. So anyway, I thought you brought up incredible points, whether it's about, a specific community, living outside or within. It's important. Teresa, did you have something to add to that?
One of the things that I've been thinking about is, clearly we're all unschoolers and we're on a panel about unschooling, but that the principles of partnership and honoring children's voices and trust and respect also make such a huge difference for children who are schooled, right? And maybe even more so. And so the principles that I think we're advocating in terms of the kind of relationship that we can build with children, I think serves all children. And so what I liked, even though I connect a lot with the unschooling community, I also believe it's really critical to not just see ourselves in just that way. Some people don't, might be single parents who right now don't have the choice to unschool or homeschool. And there are so many ways in which we can support not just this community that we identify with, but communities who may not see it as an option, either from a socioeconomic standpoint or a resource standpoint, or, in whatever ways there are community challenges. So I really love to think of what we do as paradigm shifting for the ways in which parents, adults really can support children and create equitable relationships, whether they're in or out of school.
Beautiful and well said. And I think everyone on this panel is modeling. We're modeling to the outside world through our work to show that there is the potential of a new paradigm in education, new paradigm in partnership, new paradigm in everything. So yes, thank you, everybody. This has been one of the most fun, incredible, fabulous panels I've been a part of. And I think you're all so incredible, doing wonderful work. And I'd like to give everybody on this panel an opportunity to say a few closing words if they'd like to, and also give out their information, their websites, or their information about their books, their films, whatever it is that they want to give, that they want to share. And also I want to remind our audience that all the information for each of our panelists can be found at the website at theconsciousconsumernetwork.tv. So Jeremy, why don't you start off first and give out your information, and if there's a few final words you'd like to share. I know Jeremy's having some connectivity problems. He just typed a message to me. So we'll come back to you. Hopefully he'll be able to connect back. So why don't we go back to you, Scott?
Cutting out.
Oh, Jeremy, you here?
Can you hear me?
We could. Shoot. I think we lost.
No,
there you are.
Yeah, I'm back.
Okay, yay, great. Just in time.
Yeah, there seems to be some problem with the internet connection at the moment. It's cutting out a lot, so it just refreshed, so maybe it's better now.
I can hear you clearly. Yeah, it's great. So go ahead. And did you want to sing a song too?
No, I don't want to sing a song.
Okay. So go ahead and share any final thoughts, any final words.
Sure. Well, first of all, I want to thank you for inviting me to be a part of this panel. It's been really wonderful to meet Teresa and to meet you, and to reconnect with Scott, who I haven't seen in a little while as well. So thank you very much for the honor and privilege of being part of this. And, I just want to say also that the film is out there. We're doing our best to get it seen as widely as possible. We have 4 screenings coming up in Texas in April. We're doing Dallas, Austin, San Antonio, and Houston. And all the information on that can be found on our website at classdismissedmovie.com. So please check it out. Those of you who have been listening, if you're interested in finding out more, please go to the website and find out where we might be screening near you. And that's all I want to say at this point. So thank you very much for your support.
Thank you. Thank you so much for being a part of this panel and making that beautiful film. If anybody is on the fence about what they should do with their children, their education and the educational path, this is actually a fabulous film to consider, because you've got 2 full years of following one family and how they dealt with this decision. And it's you feel like you're a part of this family, and it's a beautiful, beautiful film. So thank you for making it, for having the insight and the foresight to go there and tell this story. And Scott, why don't you go ahead and give us your info next, and any final thoughts, any closing remarks?
Well, and before I say anything about myself, I just want to put in another thumbs up for Jeremy's film. It's like, I've seen it 3 times now at 3 different showings, and it's just, I'm so blown away by how awesome it is. and that I have such great respect for Jeremy. I have such great respect for him, because he could have, so many of those kinds of films are the kind of shove it down your throat point of view, look at my point of view and this is why I'm right and everyone else is wrong. And he never succumbs to the temptation to do that. He's really just telling a story and letting it speak for itself. And of course, lucky to have found this amazing family, but it really, it allows you to see this, to see a family go through a deschooling process. And by watching that, it deschools you a little bit in terms of freeing you from some of the constraints of schoolish thinking that may be preventing you from seeing opportunities for partnership with your children, even if they are in school. And if a lot of my subscribers are people who are not unschoolers, not even homeschoolers, and I've invited them to watch this, and so I hope they don't think that we're shoving it down their throat. We love what we do, but I'd say I could speak for all of us here that we really respect that everyone is on a path, and there's no one right path. And so for many people, that can include having their children in a conventional school, and there are ways that you can bring these attitudes even into that path. And so I just want to reaffirm that. If you're interested in my work, it's the center of it right now is at my website called The Daily Groove, and it's the dailygroove.com. So that's easy enough to find. And it's I have a free newsletter where you can sign up, and I give you it's kind of a way to take in new ideas that just sort of free you from old ways of thinking, but also to practice the new ways. So with every post that I send out, there is a kind of a daily practice, and I try to keep it brief. So that's what I'm focused on right now. I also offer coaching for parents who are trying to make this shift and need some support or need help sorting things out. And you can find out information there as well.
Thank you so much, Scott. And I do have to say, just as passionately as I spoke about the film, Daily Groove is a really great way to keep yourself connected to your own process and to stay inspired. So I urge everybody to sign up for his daily, what do you call them? The daily messages?
Daily grooves.
The daily
I call them grooves. I do.
I'll second that, because I get them every day too, and I always look forward to them. I scan through all my email until I find that, and then I read that, and then I can read the rest.
It's great. It's a great service that you offer. So thank you so much, Scott, for being a part of this panel. And it was really great to reconnect with you again after, I think it's been 3 years since we last connected, huh?
Oh my God, it has been nearly 3 years. That's amazing. I mean, I feel like we stay connected online, but it is, we need to figure out more ways to connect in person. All of us, not just us, but all these people who, I mean, and again, the conferences are great for that. And it just really feels good to be in a place where you're not so weird, you know? So I would encourage everyone to go to these conferences and enjoy the feeling of, you know, not having to explain yourself, that you've had made all these different choices, or that you're considering making them. And while we're in a Mutual Admiration Society mode, I do want to just also thank Teresa for coming on this call. And I love her work, and I hope she promotes her book.
Let's jump over to her next and let her speak for herself. So, Teresa,
it's all right, Scott. You were doing great. No,
thank you. Teresa, go ahead and any final words. Share your book. Oh, before you do, Scott, hold up your book. I know it's sitting right there. There you go, the Daily Group. All right, Teresa, I'm going to have you do the same. So,
all right. Look, I'll do the book thing. There's the book thing. Parenting for Social Change. My website is also parentingforsocialchange.com. And, you know, in terms of last thoughts, what I want to say is the work that the internal work I've had the opportunity to engage in, because my oldest son decided it was not working anymore for him, has just been the most joyful and powerful work, empowering and powerful work I've ever done in all, you know, from comparing it to my professional work, all of those things. It has been so joyful in so many ways and brought so much more to my life than I ever expected, beyond what I thought it might be to be a parent. And so even though it's hard and challenging, and as Jeremy said, there's this discomfort and there's that joy in discomfort. And if we can find that, I think it's just such an amazing experience to be able to, you know, to have that kind of relationship so that you become a more whole human being in that process. And, you know, it's really powerful. And you know, the work that I do is all about, you know, we're all talking about the same thing, but how it is that we really connect with children. And for me, it comes from the lens of social justice, because those are the tools that I learned in terms of how it is we can really transform our thinking, transform our day-to-day practice of how we are with children who in our society have less power. And that's been a really critical part of my own journey as a parent, and understanding the institutional privilege and power that I have, and how it is that we then, you know, connect to the greater world when we have those fears as well. That's really, it's all about transformation and transformative learning as parents. And, you know, we're doing a lot of that work so that they can be free to do what they need to do. So you can find me at parentingforsocialchange.com. I have an intensive program that's coming up, and it's going to start in April as well. If parents want to work with me over the next year, we're going to do 3 modules, and you'll find more information about that on my website as well, and can sign up for my newsletter. And just, I love being in conversation with Scott, with Jeremy. It was great to meet you. And Lainey, thank you for inviting me to be a part of the panel.
Thank you so much for being a part of this panel. I was so excited when you said yes. I discovered your work really just this year. And since then, I had been, you know, reading as much as I could, anything that you've written that's out there besides your book, because I don't have my hands on a copy of it yet. But the idea of parenting for social change really struck me internally as something that we don't look at. We don't look at what happens inside our houses, our small families, change the social climate. And that was a powerful idea for me. Your interviews that you've given, I've listened to many of your interviews. You're always so spot on. You have such incredible ideas, and it's been such an honor to speak with you here tonight, Teresa. So thank you, and I look forward to meeting you this fall in person.
Yes,
so
that's great.
Thank you, everybody. This panel's been incredible. Before we sign out, I want to take a moment and just thank my incredible producer, Nina, who's an introvert, and she's behind the scenes, and she's doing incredible work. She has booked shows between now and the next 3 or 4 months. She's put together some incredible panels, and together we're really working together to try and create a voice for the alternative education movement. So with that being said, wherever you are and whatever you're doing, continue doing it always for the love of learning. And we're out.